Welcome to Lecture 3 in the Introduction to Proof series. This is the video lectures designed to go along with the book General Introduction to the Art of Mathematics. So today we probably have a slightly short lecture because there's really just one thing to take care of. Section 1.3 in the book introduces quantifiers, which is they're a pretty powerful way of thinking about things that helps make math really useful. Sometimes, always, never is the way I titled this. So, what's the first thing? This is, of all of them, this is the always version. There's this classic book on how to do argumentation by Aristotle, and one of the arguments that he uses is a sample of something that later goes by the name of modus ponens. It begins with all men are mortal. Actually, if you want to know the whole thing, it says all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. It's a pretty tight little simple nugget of argumentation, but there's a lot of things that can be put into that form. First there's a claim that something is true for all people or all things of a certain category. Then there's a claim about a particular thing, and then finally the deduction that the thing from part one is applicable to that particular thing. So that's a universal quantifier, anything that starts with an all. Now, I think I've overstated things here a little bit. It's probably not the first time anybody used a universal quantifier, but it is likely the first time anybody realized the importance of it and called it out for what it is. The idea that you're making a restriction, well, sort of not a restriction, the opposite of a restriction. You're not just talking about a set, but everything in that set has some statement that's true about it. Anyway, universal quantification, that's really just a fancy way to say what I just said. Some statement is true all the time for everything in a universe of discourse. Okay, so now all men are mortal, and there's no intent to be sexist here. I should probably read all humans are mortal. But anyway, it's certainly true. I don't think there have been any humans so far who've lived infinitely long. Mortal just literally means that you will eventually die. What do you need to do in general if you want to show some universal sentence isn't true? Let's think about this example. Consider all primes are odd. That's not true, is it? What prime is it that tells us this claim is false? And is it to show that that's false, do we need to show that all the primes are even? No, that's not right. So it's interesting to show that the all thing is not true. You just have to come up with one that breaks the rule. So yeah, it is enough to notice that 2 is both prime and even, and this is possibly the worst math joke of all time, which is odd. Anyway, never statements. Never statements are really also universals. They're just universals of something that's stated in the negative. So a silly example here, the statement, we can never have nice things, which I remember my mother saying all the time. It has the same meaning as it's always true. It's always the case that our rotten kids will destroy anything nice that we get, which sadly was probably true for my mom. Finally, there's this intermediate thing. It's between always and never, there's sometimes things that are true for some of the elements of your universe of discourse. I like to think about that temporally, but it's really about things within a set. Another silly example. Some days it's not worth getting out of bed. Have you ever felt that way? If you always felt that way, that'd be pretty horrible. But everybody has one of those days on occasion where you just feel like you shouldn't engage with other people. Um, so that's definitely a some days a situation. Well, some primes are even. That's true because 2 is a prime and it exists, and there you go. You've got a prime that's even. Similarly, now this is back to a universal. All primes are odd. Notice how that's false also because of 2? There's a there's an inherent relationship between these two sentences. Some primes are even and all primes are odd. One's true, the other's false, and for the same reason. That's something we'll investigate more when we get into looking at this in greater depth. So the notation for these quantifiers is, it's kind of interesting. I think it dates back to the time when people used literally mechanical typewriters to write their math papers. So what you could do is take the paper out of your typewriter and put it in upside down and type a character, and so you get an upside down character. And that's the symbol we use for the universal quantifier, an upside down A. See it right here. That's basically an abbreviation for the words for all or for every. So that's what you use when you're doing an always type statement. Existential quantifier is a backwards E. I think same thing happens. You can turn the paper upside down and type an E and you get that a thing that looks like that. So anyway, the backwards E, shorthand for there is or there exists. Sometimes it's true that, things like that. Okay, so let's run some examples of using the quantifiers. And in these examples, we're going to let P be the set of all people. So this doesn't feel very mathy. It's sort of more fun and games. This one has the for all quantifier first. For all x in P, there exists y in P. I'm just reading it as we go across. That A is for all. The funky E means in. So that first snippet there is for all x in P. Since P is a set of all people, this says for all x, that's a person. Then we have there exists y, that's a person. X loves y. Isn't that sweet? So what's the meaning of that? For everything in the set of people, there is something in the set of people where the first thing loves the second thing. I think it's sort of the lyric to a country music song. Everybody loves somebody. I don't know. How about this one? All that I've done here, I've left the sentence at the end be x loves y, just like it was before. But this one had for all x in P first, and then there exists y in P second. And this one has them switched around. There exists y in P for all x in P. What does that mean? There is a human such that for all humans, the second one loves the first one. There's somebody that everybody loves. That's you see how that's a far cry from what the first one did. So again, changing the order will mess up the meaning of quantified sentences. You have to think carefully about what order the quantifiers come in. Yeah, Helen of Troy. I don't know. There's hard to think of too many people that everybody loves. Okay, what's this one? I've got the same quantifier order as in the previous one, exists, then for all. But exists x, and then for all is for all y. See how the variables to which they apply have been switched. So there exists an x in the set of people such that, and for all y in the set of people, x loves y. There is somebody who, for everybody else, that first guy loves the second, all those other people. That's Don Juan. Yeah, that's the guy who's in love with all women, or all people. That's what we're saying it here. There's a fourth way to mess up the order here. I think I'll leave that for you to explore. but it would involve the for all first and then exists and then switching the variables. Basically, there's two switches that can go on. Do you switch where the for all and the exists are, or do you switch which is x and which is y, which is first and which is second? Uh, and so with two possible switches, then there's four ways that you can combine those switches. I'll let you work out what the last one would be. The main takeaway here, though, is just what I've said multiple times. Order is important. Watch out for it when you're doing math stuff. So here's another light moment in this lecture. I don't know if people in the modern generation will know who Johnny Carson was. He was a host on late night television while I was growing up, so kind of a long while ago. I think he retired like back in the 80s. So been gone for a long time, but he was one of the first people to do these late night shows where you bring in movie stars and stuff who were trying to promote their shows or whatever. And he's kind of set the format. I think there was another guy named Jack Parr who was even before him, and he did it. He may be the originator of this format rather than Carson, but Carson really made it famous. He was like the king of late night TV for, I think, 2.5 or 3 decades. He was on there forever. So one of the things they always do in these type shows is start off with an opening monologue, right? It's a little comedy bit where just like a stand-up comedian would normally do. And there's a joke that a colleague of mine pointed out that he did in one of his opening monologues that perfectly illustrates the question of importance of order of quantifiers. In fact, it illustrates how we speak sloppily in ordinary language. That is, it's okay in ordinary speech to mess around with the quantifiers because people will know what you mean. But when you think about it more precisely, well, you get a disconnect which leads to comedy. So here's my paraphrasing of his opening monologue. I read a news article that said there's a woman in America having a baby every 5 minutes. Shouldn't somebody stop her? Do you get why that's really an issue about quantification? It's saying there is a woman having a baby in every 5-minute intervals. So it literally says there's this one woman in every 5-minute interval she's having a baby. Clearly that's not what was meant. What they meant to say is in every 5-minute interval, there's a woman in America having a baby. But they didn't. So, it becomes humorous. Let's do something a little more serious. There's a quantified sentence on the next slide here. For all x in the reals, there exists y in the reals where the product xy equals 1. What's that say? Well, basically, that's saying that for every real number x, there is a real number y that is its multiplicative inverse. That's what it means to multiply together to get 1. Is that true? Is that a true statement? Maybe I'll leave it hanging for a sec. Here's another one. There exists an x in the reals. We'll see how the quantifier has been switched around. There exists first. Right? This guy was for all first, and then this one is there exists first. There exists an x in the reals. For all y in the reals, the product is 0. Can you think of what that would be? Or is there? Maybe that's not true. Let's see what it means. This says there's a real number, and that is actually a technical term that annihilates every other real number. That is, multiplying by this real number x just kills them off, turns them to 0. Is that a true sentence? Well, both of these are true and or false for the same reason, because 0 is a real number. You see, the one exception in the top one is when x is 0. There's nothing you can multiply 0 by and get 1. Right? You know that multiplicative inverse is essentially the same thing as the reciprocal. And if you take the reciprocal of 0, you're putting 1 over 0. That's disallowed. You're not allowed to divide by 0. So no there. The second sentence, 0 is also the reason it's, well, in this case, it's the reason it's true. There exists X in R such that, I always mess that up. There exists X in R for all Y in R, the product is 0. Yes, there does exist such a thing, it's 0. 0 itself is the annihilator for the real numbers. And I think it's probably reasonable that the notation R star wouldn't even exist if these two things weren't, on the one hand, false, on the other hand, true. R star is a set where if we had stars on these R's, it would be all good. Let's see, if it said for all, let's read this one with those R's replaced with R stars. For all non-zero real numbers, there exists a non-zero real number, so the product is 1. That's good. That's true. What about this one? There exists a non-zero real number. For all non-zero real numbers, the product is 0. Well, no, it's no longer true. And that's good, because this is sort of a bad thing to happen, right? Something that you multiply and everybody gets killed off feels uncomfortable. Okay, so I'm going to open up Overleaf and show you a little illustration of how to typeset quantifiers, but more generally to write some mathematical notation, get you used to that in LaTeX. I'll just, these things are included here in the slides just so that people who are keeping track of things will have a way to refer back to it. You get the symbol here for all, the upside down A, by typing $, for all, and then $. And exists is very similar, except exists is the thing after the backslash. All right, so let me open up Overleaf. And in the previous slides or lecture, I created this temp document, which actually was one that they created for us. It was just something kind of start with this, and then you can fill in your own blanks. I'm gonna take the picture of this galaxy out of here. We don't need that. And I don't think we need to have a document with any citations either. So I'm taking out all the junk that involves bibliographies and the actual citations. Conclusion. We've got an even simpler document here. Actually, these package. Oh, okay. So I should teach you how to look at the source code a little bit for a LaTeX document. The first thing that you start off with is a document class. You tell the system what kind of thing you're building. Acceptable arguments to this are article is a nice one. Book, if you want to write a book, you can do that in LaTeX. Report is a pretty nice example. There's a letter or a document class that you can use. But this first sentence or first command in here gives you sort of a template for how LaTeX commands will look. They always begin with a backslash and the name of the thing. And if it requires arguments, not everything does, but if it requires arguments, they'll be in French braces. Right? So if the document class thing definitely requires you to tell me what kind of document. So that does have the argument in French braces. Here we are using a package. So the command is use package. LaTeX has lots of packages that you can use. The package name is called input enc, which means input encoding. And UTF-8 allows us to recognize some of the characters that are typically not seen in American or even English writing, but you see them in European writings. Things like umlauts over a U or accent grave on an E, So that input encoding thing is useful. If you didn't have it in there, you'd have to be very careful that all your input symbols, all the actual text that you type, is just plain ASCII characters. Okay. Some other commands in here, a title. Well, temp is a terrible title. What should we call this thing? Example. That's a little better. The author, my name is in there. It actually put my name in there because it knew it's my account, right? So it knew what my name was and put the day, at least it put the month and the day. We're not going to need to use these packages. But all this stuff that I've done so far is kind of set up, if you know what I mean. We haven't actually created any words on paper yet. I'm just told it about information like what the title of the document is going to be, what my name is, what kind of document it is. All of that is known as the preamble. So everything before you get to this command /begin document, that's preamble. Then this is the body of the document you're creating. If I didn't have this /make title right here, this stuff that's printed, the title and my name and the date, wouldn't appear. I can do two things at once here. I'll show you a very useful thing. In LaTeX, the percent sign is used to comment stuff out. So once you see a percent, nothing on the rest of that line gets looked at. So by putting that percent right there, I basically made the make title disappear as far as the LaTeX system is concerned. So if we recompile now, notice how there's no title up front. Now I can change that back, uncomment out the thing and recompile. And there's our example title and my name and the date. Okay. I'm not going to change the body of that paragraph, but I'm going to show you some math. Okay. So this would be a little bit silly in this sentence. So yeah, let's start a new sentence. How about here's an equation in line in a sentence. And I'm going to put my equation right in the middle of this stupid sentence, although, this probably doesn't make very good sense grammatically. But when you want to do math stuff, you surround it with symbols that tell you you're in math. Dollars is one way to do it. There are a couple of ways to create something in math mode, but in between the dollars, you're in math mode, and a whole different set of rules apply. For instance, you can write something like that, y equals x up caret 2, and it knows to treat that up caret as an exponent. So now, well, let's recompile and see what it looks like. This is awfully small. Can I zoom in on this guy? Still wish I could see it a little bit closer up, but there's my equation. Y equals x squared with the 2 as an exponent in line in a sentence, which is a terrible sentence. But, I'm just trying to give examples here. And I spelled sentence wrong. It's kind of nice that the editor does that and underline squiggle thing to tell you to fix things. You also should probably put a period at the end of your sentences. Let me show you the other way that you'll often need to do math in writing. And this is where you display something out by itself on a line. It's called display math. And the way I usually use display math is a backslash and a square bracket. And that's ended with a backslash and a closing square bracket. So the stuff in between these two things will be displayed on a line by itself. So let's do one of our sentences that involves quantifiers. So I'm going to universally quantify for all x / in, let's just call it u for universe. Exists, whoops, gotta say exists pluralized, y in u line. And then finally, well, how about we use that same one I did before? The product of them is 1. Let's see how that looks. By the way, is this writing that I've just done here a sentence, or is that got some other standing? It's generally thought that displayed math should stand alone as a sentence, which means it ought to have a subject and an well, at least a subject and a verb. Well, at least a verb, but usually a subject and a verb. and often a direct object. And this does have it. Where's the verb in this? It's the symbol equals right in there. The equal sign is actually saying this thing is equal to that thing. If you read it and turn it into English words, that's a verb. Okay, so let's compile it and see what that looks like. Also go to full screen so you can see it better. For all x in u exists y in u, xy equals 1. It's accurate. One thing I find that I often object to when I'm looking at LaTeX documents is the spacing just isn't very pretty. So sometimes you have to go back in and adjust the spacing of things a little bit yourself. There are a couple of different spacing commands that you can use. So let's take that out so we see the, I guess I can go full screen on this part too. I'd like there to be a little more space between the first quantification bit and the second. A nice way to do that is a backslash and a comma. That gets you a small amount of space. And we could put a backslash and a comma there too. That sort of stretches it out a little bit. Let's see how it looks. Oops. There we go. This thing, recompile it. Did it go? I can't tell. Do it a second time just for sure. It's a little better, but you know what? I'm not really happy about that space. It's not quite enough. So let me show you the next spacing option up. Instead of a backslash and a comma, do a backslash and a semicolon. And that gets you a slightly more aggressive amount of space. Yeah, now that looks a little more comfortable. There's some room in between those things. You know, these are things you play with and you may choose to do or not. I mean, it improves readability sometimes, but it's not totally necessary. And just for the sake of completeness, I'll tell you, if you want more than the semicolon level of space, there's a space command called quad, which means you get the same amount of space as a square letter would be. Let's do it in both places and you'll see. See how much room is in there now? And if that's not enough for you, there's double Q quad. Well, okay. let's not get carried away. I always do. But, and that, I believe, brings us to the end of today's lecture. So I think, like I said, this will be a little bit on the short side, but maybe it gives you a break. All right, yeah. So I just froze for a second there. Okay, stop. Say goodbye. See you later. Have a good rest of your day.